The Holy Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, has said, surely there exists in the hearts of the mu'mineen with respect to the martyrdom of al-Husayn alayhi salam, a heat or a fire which will never die down and will never subside. When we commemorate the tragedy of Ashura and the tragedy of Abu Abdullah, as well as the other A'imma and members of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we can do so in various different forms. We can do so through the means of poetry, through the means of serving others with food and with water. We can do it through donating our blood. We can do it even by distributing tissues in the majalis of Abu Abdullah. And these are all acceptable and extremely noble acts to be done. Organising majalis in memory of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam and all of the other awliya of Allah is another way in which we pay our respects to Sayyid al-Shuhada when we commemorate his martyrdom in the fields of Karbala. And not just to remember the sacrifice of Imam Hussein back 1400 years ago, but instead we use the majalis to continue on the lessons which he taught through his martyrdom, whether that be promoting the correct type of Islamic thinking in our lives today, or whether it be linking the struggle of Imam Hussein alayhi salam to the struggle of the free people today who are resistant against the people who represent the Yazid of our time. So we established these majalis to honour his martyrdom, to recite the details of his martyrdom, and to keep his legacy alive against corruption and oppression. And we have narrations from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, where he starts crying in front of his companions. And they come to him and they ask, Ya Rasulullah, why is it that you have broken down in tears all of a sudden? And he answers them by saying that the angel Jibreel came down to him and he told him that his grandson al-Husayn alayhi salam will be martyred in the most horrific way in a land called al-Taf. And he says that the angel Jibreel brought down clay for him from that land in which the Imam would be killed in. And he also informed the Prophet that Hussein would be buried in the land in which he was slain. Today I want to talk about the concept of Aza al-Hussein. Now, as we established, this means mourning ceremonies, majalis. It means reading latmiyas or qasida. It means doing latam and beating our chests in remembrance of Imam Hussein. And the reason we do these things is to show grief and to show our sorrow. And above all, it is to show our opposition and our repulsion to what Yazid and his forces and the people who supported Yazid stood for. This evil type of mentality that went against the basic fabrics of the religion of Islam. However, if we are doing all of these actions and we have all of these emotions in our hearts, they are pointless and they are futile and they are also hypocritical unless they accompany the will and the desire, both at an individual level and at a societal level, to change what is around us, to change any evil which we see taking place. Because this is the reason for the revolution of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This is the reason why Imam Hussein sacrifices his life and the life of children in his family. Not for power, not so that he can retake the position of Khilafah. No, these things are meaningless to the Imam. He goes because he sees wrongdoing being taken place in front of him. He sees that there is injustice and corruption at the hands of Yazid and that he will mistreat Muslims. And when he witnesses this, he is ready to give his blood so that this doesn't occur. And so if we do not move in the same footsteps that Imam Hussein did in standing against Yazid, then what is the point of our watan? What is the point of our service, of our servant food? Otherwise, we're just doing it for ourselves and for our egos and to feel like, yes, we did something. In order for us to really show the true meaning of remembering Imam Hussein, it means in all of our actions in life we follow through on what he stood for. And we should never lose focus on why we conduct this Aza. Only once we have used our Aza to move spiritually closer to the Imam and subsequently closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will we truly be doing service and khidmah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. But today I want to focus on one of the most important concepts, something which young people need to focus on especially, with all of the distractions which come their way. And this is on the concept of latm, or on the concept of the beating of one's body out of grief or sadness. And it has become well known throughout the world, both in the Shia community and in the non-Shia community, in the non-Muslim community, and even amongst people who do not have any faith, that the Shias are the ones who do latm. The Shias are the ones who beat their chest in remembrance of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And the key point to put across today is that this concept of latm is something which should never be taken away from us, and we should never underestimate its importance. But we also need to understand the reasoning behind why we do it, and we need to understand the purpose of what we are doing it for. Our leader, Imam Khamenei, talks about this issue, and he tells us that beating the chest and beating the face or the head and shedding the tears over Aba Abdullah is the most valuable thing which can possibly exist in the treasures of humanity, which must be preserved. Meaning anybody who claims to be from among us, who comes and tells us that we shouldn't do this act of latm, is disregarding the concept of mourning of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Not just going against the Maraja, but going against the Imam, going against the Holy Prophet. And what we will find out is that anybody who goes against this concept of latm and comes with a claim that it's haram has gone against the verses of the Holy Quran itself. So, when we talk about the proofs for why we do anything, for why we do any rituals in Islam, we have set criteria of what we need to follow. Of course, first and foremost, we have the Holy Quran, the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then we have the Sunnah of the Holy Prophet and of the Imam. And then what we can also use is what the Imams stayed silent on, what they did not object to. And what I will do today, in order to prove the legitimacy of the act of latm, is I will go in reverse order. Usually we will start with the Quran because this is the most valuable source of knowledge, but we'll take it in the other step. We will use the least reliable, the least important things first, and we will build up to showing why this act is so important. So we will start with the books of Ahl Sunnah. Many of our brothers in Ahl Sunnah have objections to the concept of latm. And we need to ask, not just ourselves, but them, why do you have this objection? When we look into the literature of the brothers that we have and our souls in Ahl Sunnah, we see that certain Sahaba who are revered by them were people who were not just advocates and supporters of latm, but people who practiced latm themselves. We have in the Sunni book Aqid al-Farid, one of the important books for the Sunni brothers, we have narrations that show when Nu'man died, Umar ibn al-Khattab was very upset about what happened. He was grieving the loss of this Sahaba. What he does is he begins to beat his head and he begins to wail loudly with tears in his eyes, saying, "Oh my grief for Nu'man," indicating that according to the brothers in Ahl Sunnah, one of the three or one of the four Rashidun Khalifas conducted the practice of latm when he was upset. But we can take it a step further and we can go into the books of history. In the book At-Tabari, which is one of the most well-known, famous, according to our brothers, reliable books of Islamic history, we see that Sayyidah Aisha is narrated when the Holy Prophet of Islam died. She says, "I placed his body on my lap and I began to wail. And I got up and I started to beat my face. I began to slap my face out of sadness and out of grief. And I did this along with all of the other women." So we have two of the most arguably important figures in this sect of Islam who agree that when someone important like Rasulullah or companions or awliya pass away, when you have grief for them, it is okay to beat our bodies in grief. This is the view of our brothers in Ahl Sunnah. But as we say, this does not matter to us because we have our own literature. We have our own books, we have our own proofs. So we can go to our side now. We see from Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam that when the caravan of the captives and the family members of Imam Hussein were leaving Karbala after the slaughter and after the massacre took place, the women of Bani Hashim were brought to see the bodies of the deceased martyrs. And upon seeing the bloodied, mangled, warped bodies of the men who fought and were martyred in the Battle of Karbala, upon seeing this, the grief overtook the women of Bani Hashim. As a result, they began to wail out loud. They began to beat their chests and their faces and their heads in front of Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam. So we need to ask, what did Imam Zayn al-Abidin do when he witnesses this taking place in front of him? Does he tell the women, stop doing the latam? Does he tell them that it is an embarrassment or that it is wrong for somebody to do this? No. For 3 days the women do the latam and beat themselves. And for 3 days Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam does not say a single thing indicating that they should stop. Instead he cries with them. He shares the grief with them. When the Imam is silent for 3 days, when the act of latam is taking place in front of him, if he stays silent and he does not condemn it, then this means that it is a allowed action. It is permissible. It is okay for someone to do. Secondly, again, when Imam Zayn al-Abidin comes close to Medina on the way back, one of the companions, one of the Sahaba by the name of Bishr, begins to recite poetry. And at that time there were women who, due to the nature of what had happened, refused to leave their homes. When Bishr starts reciting this poetry, they come out into the open. They come to the gathering where he is reciting this, and they not only slap their faces, but they begin to scratch them as well, to the extent where blood comes from their face. Imam Zayn al-Abidin witnesses this. Does he object to it? Does he say to them, stop doing this? No. Now you need to understand, if the Imam sees someone doing an action and he does not object to them doing it, then this means it is allowed. Think about it this way. If Imam al-Mahdi is in front of you today and you take out a pork sandwich or a ham sandwich and you begin to eat it in front of the Imam, is the Imam going to stop you and tell you, stop doing this, this is haram? Of course he is. Because our Imams are guides for what is right and what is wrong. So if the Imam sees someone doing an action and he does not tell them to stop doing it, then this is okay. And this is an act which is allowed. Lastly, we can look at Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. If we go further on in Islamic history, without just using the Battle of Karbala and the Imams who were witness to this act, we can look at Imam al-Rida, specifically the story of Di'bil al-Khuzai, who is a very famous poet and a very famous lover of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. In his famous poetry, which he reads to Imam al-Rida, he talks about the tragedy of Ashura, he talks about the tragedy of Karbala. And he says the following line of poetry. He says, if you had saw what happened that day, then you would have slapped your face out of grief and out of tragedy. How does the Imam react to this statement? When someone says, if you had seen what happened in Muharram, you would have beat your face, the Imam begins to cry. The Imam begins to wail. And he rewards this poet with a gift for the words of poetry which he recited. So the Imam therefore praises poetry in favor of the act of latam. But lastly, some people say this isn't enough. The Imam stayed silent. The Imam didn't do the latam. The Imam didn't talk about latam. Okay, we have Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, the treasure, the library of the Ahlul Bayt. What does he say? He says that hitting the face is nothing but seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because the women amongst the descendants of Fatima hit their faces when they mourned for Imam al-Hussein. Then Imam al-Sa'd says, for somebody like Imam al-Hussein, we should beat our chests and faces and rip our clothes. How then can we have someone from amongst our people who comes and says that I don't agree with latam? I don't believe in latam. We shouldn't do latam. When you say this, you go in direct contrast and opposition to Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, who tells us that this is of the most important actions to do. Finally, we have Jabir, who goes to Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam to explain and to try and get an answer of what jaza or what grief actually means. Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam replies to him and he says, true grief and the most intense form of grief is crying, is wailing, is shouting and of hitting the face and the chest. So when we are encouraged to do acts of grief in memory of Imam al-Hussein, we have the different ways in which this can be done. Again, some people will say this isn't enough. If it was really an act which is recommended and allowed in Islam, then surely Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have mentioned it in the Holy Quran. And some people, whether they are not aware of it, will reject the fact that Latam is mentioned in the Quran. However, in Surah Al-Dhariyat, we read that Lady Sarah, when she finds out the news that she would conceive a baby, the Quran states that she hit her face in grief. The commentary and the tafsir of this verse goes further and it says that she slapped herself in the face out of grief. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this openly in the Quran and He does not condemn it. Instead, the way it is used in the Quran is a natural way which a person would show grief. Therefore, we have the Sahaba doing latam. We have the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam doing latam. We have narrations which show Rasulullah did latam, and we have confirmation in the Holy Quran that latam is something which is not forbidden for us. Now, even though we have these proofs and we have these evidences, it is not enough for some people. Some people still have their own emotions which take priority for them over their religion. And they want to think logically and scientifically about how we should do latam, or how we should mourn Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Some will say this is self-harm. You are harming your body and this is haram. The answer to this question, first and foremost, I would say to that person, go and ask a scholar what is the meaning of self-harm in the religion of Islam. Beat in the chest or beat in the face does not classify as self-harm. Even if you think logically about this act being self-harm, when you go to the gym and you train a certain part of the body, say for example your legs, when you leave the gym and for the next coming days after it, people cannot walk because of the pain which they are in. Now, you will say that this is not haram. Of course it's not haram to go and work out in the gym. Why? You're hurting yourself, you're causing pain for yourself. Oh, but it's okay because the end goal is beneficial. You will become stronger and you will become healthier. Why can't we apply the same to latam? When we mourn for Imam Hussein, our Imams tell us that after we do this, we are promised a great reward for doing so. Then, if you use the argument that it is harming yourself, what about the verses in the Quran, the ahadith, the recommendations of our religion, to go and seek martyrdom, to become shaheed? Is this not putting yourself in harm's way? Or when Islam commands us that when a baby is born, it should be circumcised, is this not harming the body? Is this not causing harm upon an individual? Of course, in some ways it is causing harm. But we need to understand that these actions are acceptable. Why? Because first and foremost, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us that it is acceptable. But also because there is a benefit. And there is a hikmah behind doing these actions which leads to a reward after. And so if we accept these things, like circumcision, like seeking martyrdom, like working out and causing pain in this way, the end goal is positive. Likewise, beating our chest for Imam Hussein alayhi salam brings massive positivity. Then we have people who say that this act makes us look bad in the eyes of non-Muslims. That when they see people doing the latam, they think badly about Islam. The same concept can be applied when non-Muslims will look at us going to Hajj and when we rock multiple times around a rock in the ground, or when we go and throw stones at a wall. These acts to a non-Muslim who has no understanding of Islam, this will make us look bad, this will make us look insane. Are you now proposing that we stop doing this? Of course not, because this is something which our religion has told us to do. Our life and our challenges and trials are not meant for us so that people around us in the Western society can look at us and think, wow, they're amazing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put us on this earth to do our rituals and to propagate this properly to people. Therefore, if somebody does not understand latam and they think it makes us look bad, why don't we go and explain it to them and explain the meaning behind it rather than stopping it altogether? Sayyid al-Sadr talks about this. He says that if there is some act or some ritual in the month of Muharram which people think is negative, then polish it. Don't get rid of it. Make it accessible for people to understand why we are doing it. This institution of Azar is like a school. If there is a problem in the school, you do not shut the school down. You go in, you see what can be tweaked, what can be made better so that people's learning can be enhanced. If we then give up on this concept of latam, which some people from among us want us to do, then we are giving in. And we are surrendering. Who are we surrendering to? We're surrendering to Yazid. We're surrendering to Mutawakkil. We're surrendering to Harun al-Rashid. All of these tyrants, all of these individuals who stood against our religion, who wanted to erase the memory of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And when they come and they say, why do you remember Muharram? And why do you do this latam in Muharram for Abu Abdullah? The reason why we do it so much and so often is that if we forget about this latam and we forget about this azar, then you will forget about what happened to Imam al-Hussein, just like how you forgot about what happened to Imam Ali on the day of Badr. This is why it's so important to propagate this azar, this latam. All of the studies which we have in terms of psychology, sociology, they show that when individuals gather together and they create an organized ceremony for getting the grief out of the body, then this is one of the most beneficial ways for the human mind to overcome sadness and grief. So when they come with the argument that latam is not natural because you gather in a circle and you do it in time, the studies show that doing this in a rhythmatic order and in a way which carries a rhythm is beneficial, is psychologically beneficial to an individual. And so when we engage in this mourning, what we do when we have our latam is that we internalize and we live the tragedy of what happened to Imam Hussein in Karbala. What it does is it makes us more aware and more likely to act against injustice when we see it taking place in front of us, because it's something so innate to our belief and our nature. And so when we say that latam is a form of resistance, we really truly mean this. It isn't just a phrase. It is a proven method to help us act positively in our everyday lives. Our Shia, the Imam says, is the one whose heart is free of any malice, of any evil, of any deceit, of any corruption. His words and his deeds are only for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallah, over the next few days we are about to reach the night of Ashura. We are about to reach the night of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And we need to ask ourselves a question: do we stay in the same rut of doing our latam without any thought behind why we do it? Or do we make this year the time where we make it a change, so that when the month of Muharram ends, we do not go back to all our harmful practices? So that when we finish the month of Muharram, we don't put the music on in the car. Instead, we continue listening to Quran and our Shaykh Latmiyah. Is it going to be a turning point for us? Is it going to be the year where we actually realize that we are either on the side of Al-Hussein materially and physically, or whether we are of the people of Kufa who say that they are with Al-Hussein, but in reality they just sit and abandon him? We need to ask these questions. And I'll finish with one of the quotes from Sheikh Ahmed al-Wa'ili, who advised us something beautiful. He says that latam and the zanjir and any of these associated acts are good. They are beneficial. They are positive. But Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam doesn't need them. He doesn't need you specifically to beat your chest. He doesn't need you to hit your back with the chain. The Imam doesn't need this. Why would he need this? It's an insult to say that the Imam needs you to go and do the latam. What he needs is for you to do that latam with the understanding of why you are doing it, and with devotion and a passion that you are going to understand this religion better. This religion which he died preserving. He wants you to reject tyranny in all of its forms, corruption in all of its forms whenever you see it, and to propagate this religion with all of your ability, even if it means that it causes your death or your martyrdom. These are what we must push with Aza in all of the different forms in which it can take, and for the souls of the Shuhada of Karbala, and for the martyrs and madhumeen across the world. Please recite Surah Al-Fatiha after Salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.